Hello again. So today you should be looking at this anchor chart that goes over a couple of different options for how to end your realistic fiction story. And after today's lesson, we should have a complete full draft that we can offer to our peers for feedback and start to revise so that we can finish up our final copies next week. Anyway, I'm going to walk you through this anchor chart briefly, and then I'm going to give you an example of how to just flash draft out an ending to your story so we at least have a complete full rough draft. So one way to do it is to close the circle, which means the ending will remind the reader of something that happened in the very beginning, whether it was a planned trip or maybe an object that was shared, or it could be anything, but you want to reference something that happened earlier or at the beginning of the story. The next option is the tie back, where you tie the ending back to some other funny or offbeat moment that happened earlier in the story. It's similar to closing the circle, but it doesn't have to be the very beginning. It could be any particular moment you want to connect to in the story. The payoff, where there is a big journey that comes to an end, a big secret is revealed, or a mystery is solved. That's a pretty classic one for student for student writing. It should not be like some miracle, for example, however, like the example that I gave you earlier this week about someone winning the lottery and solving the character's problem. You want it to be realistic. Okay. The epilogue is something that might be a little bit more advanced, but it kind of hints at what happens in the future. So your story ends, but life goes on. And so you can add a section that talks about how the character is in a couple of years, or you can kind of fast forward to years later to give a scene about how they have changed based on whatever problem they overcame in the story. Problem and solution is pretty much what all of these are doing, because you all have a problem in your story, and so you need to make sure that your ending has solved that problem in a satisfactory manner. So in other words, if you are framing this mostly about the problem, make sure that you have offered your readers either a possible solution or hinting at a resolution in a way that satisfies your audience, but also suggests a theme or a message. And then the final one is where you just have the characters talking. And that could be like a clever piece of exchange where they are talking about how they overcame something together. It could be anything, but you can end your story with people just talking. And there, in the student example that I showed you on Monday, you'll see an example of how that ending looks if you want to go back and check it. So anyway, I'm going to pull up my draft, and I've decided that I'm going to go with probably closing the circle. So I have most of my story drafted out here, and let's say I just want to flash draft out the ending just so I have all of the elements, and that way I can add to it or zoom in if I need to later. So I'm going to just type up what did I call it again? The tie back, or I'm sorry, closing the circle, because in the very beginning of my story, my husband, who is currently crushed under a tree, if you remember, that's the fictional conflict I created. At the beginning of the story, he was just worried about the power going out. And so I'm going to tie back and maybe have us talk. I might blend a couple of these techniques and maybe point out that maybe we should have been a little bit more worried than just the power, right? We should have been more worried about the storm. So I'm going to do just this very quickly. I'll try to talk through it so that you understand my moves or my decisions as a writer. The ambulance ride was a blur with tubes and beeping noises in the background as we sped towards the hospital. My husband was awake, and the looks on the paramedics' faces actually started to reassure me. So I'm hinting, reassure me. I'm hinting at the fact that he's going to be okay, to give my reader a sense that we are now in the following action part of the story. After a few, notice that I'm using paragraph breaks for each of my scenes. That's just a little thing that you can work on as well as you're working during a workshop this afternoon and throughout the day. Okay, so after a few x-rays, we were all relieved to hear that my husband would had only suffered a few broken ribs, and maybe he broke his arm. And I don't even know what an arm bone is, but I could Google that. And a broken arm. Okay, broken arm. I delicately hugged him as he lay in the hospital bed. I think it's called a gurney, but I don't remember how to spell it. Hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. He was going to be okay. I sighed as I leaned toward him to kiss his forehead. And to think, I stifled a small laugh. You were just worried about the power going out. He managed a small smile and warned me. Let me scroll down so you can see. Careful. It hurts my ribs when I laugh. Okay, so this is just one example, and again, that's just a quick flash draft that I was able to get done in 5 minutes. I'm just kind of dumping my thoughts on the paper so that I have a complete draft. During my revision time, I can go back in and decide where I want to add more details, maybe dialogue. But right now I have all of the checklist items that are necessary to have a full draft. And then when it's time to make some revision decisions, I can get some feedback from my peers, or you can ask for help from your teacher.